Hello, everyone. Welcome to our October webinar. I'm Denise, and with me is QAD and MRP expert, Don Lindsay. Please know that everyone connects to the webinar already muted, but you can type in questions or comments at any time throughout the session. Enter them into the bottom of your control pane where you should see the red arrow pointing. And then during the Q&A, we'll address the questions in the order received. Also, a very brief survey will pop up automatically as you exit the session today. We ask only 2 questions and provide a field for comments, so it is very quick but a very helpful survey. Finally, as soon as the replay of today's session is available, each of you will receive our Encore email. It will include a link to the replay, all of today's questions and answers. Also, the replay page will provide you with links to our prior 2 webinars that covered other aspects of purchasing. Don will be mentioning those briefly. And now let's learn from instructor extraordinaire, Don Lindsay.
Good morning, and thank you, Denise, for that kind introduction. Welcome to our 3rd in a series of webinars on purchasing functions in QAD. Again, I have to apologize for canceling the July 22nd webinar, but I think, as I mentioned in September, I got the COVID. Feeling much better now, but an ugly experience. Much like Chris Christie got with the COVID, but I was not hospitalized, nor did I receive all the wonder drugs. Took me about 6 weeks to recover, and now I have the antibodies, and even my wife, who was asymptomatic, has the antibodies. So we started our discussions of purchasing back in January of 2020. Then we had a second purchasing webinar in March of this year. And after interspersing a couple of service and support and some inventory discussions, we are now off on some more of the superb functionality housed in QAD regarding how to deal with the interface on the supply side of our supply chains. So in January, we covered pretty much the basics of purchasing, how to set it up, purchasing control, we talked about MRP, discrete purchase orders, etc. Then in March, we continued with supplier data, which we'll talk a little bit about today, supplier schedules, and supplier consignment. So today, on the 21st, we're going to cover a little bit more about the supplier data, talk about some cost issues. We'll cover a little bit about accounts payable, talk about evaluated receipts settlement, supplier performance, the supplier pricing, and just look quickly at the supplier portal. As we always mention, lots of terms that you have to become familiar with when you're dealing with anything in QAD. In this case, it's purchasing, so supply types and consignment items and all of those new terms. So we suggest that you have a solid set of work instructions and a company wiki so that you know exactly what you're talking about when you discuss these things at your facility. So let's talk about supplier setup just quickly. The supplier maintenance menu, okay, allows you to create, modify, view, delete, do the Excel integration, and then some auto numbering functionality. But before we look at the supplier, let's talk a little bit about the business relationship. There are 12 elements that require a business relationship. So before you can enter a supplier, you have to create, in this case, the supplier or the business relationship before you can enter the supplier relationship. The business relationship menu, 36.1.4.3.1, the business relationship Create has header information. The business relationship is basically the code that you're going to use for any one of those 12 elements that we looked at. Depends on how you want to do that. You can use auto numbering if you're into non-significant sequentially assigned items. That's the business relation. Then you have a name of the business relationship. You can define a search name. There's a second and a third name. There's a group number and whether this particular business relationship is active. The business relationship address tab allows you to define address information that are the prerequisite for creating the employees and the customers and the entities in supplier record. So you enter address, telephone, tax information, country, state, etc. Then the next tab in the 36.1.4.3 is the business relationship general tab. And so here you enter information like language code, domain, internal entity, intercompany codes. You allow customer or supplier compensation, etc., etc. Then the third tab in the business relationship is what we see as relating to the SAF or supplemental analysis fields. And these are fields that allow you to define your own schemas, your own sort criteria, and allow you to report the general ledger transactions against those SAF codes. Very handy tool for you in terms of business relationships. 32SOP, we've just come out with a new business relationship loader. I won't go into that too much, but now you can use one of the familiar 32SOP loaders to enter and modify your business relationship data in EE. So the supplier setup. Once you've created the business relationship, now you need to go in and edit the 28.2.1.1 supplier create. So the first tab is the business relationship. That's going to come from the activity that you just did in 36.1.4.3.1. Then you have an accounting tab. Accounting tab allows you to put in profiles. You use profiles basically when you have shared sets and you need to define relationship to the shared sets. I think we've talked about that a little bit before in previous webinars. Then there is the supplier type and the purchasing type in the supplier. This is very handy. The supplier type maintenance allows you to create codes for grouping suppliers for reporting purposes. And then there's some examples of supplier types. Then the purchasing type, that allows you also another mechanism for grouping invoices for reporting out of the general ledger. There are some examples of some purchasing types that you may want to use. So then we come to the supplier information. So in the 28.20.1.1 supplier create, we have the payment tab. Payment tab defines the credit terms. It defines the invoice status code. You can have payment groups. If you deal with Belgium or Luxembourg, you've got a code there for that processing. And so that payment tab allows you to create the information. The banking tab allows you to define your default banks, your bank formats, supplier bank numbers, etc., etc. And then the tax information tab allows you to relate the global tax management. I won't spend too much time on global tax management. If you want to use, go look at the user guide. That's very helpful to understand how QAD deals with global tax. And then there's a comment field, again, almost an infinite number of pages, rows. You can put lots and lots of information in there for a particular supplier that you're going to enter. The 2.3.1 is the old SE supplier menu, and you need to do that SE 23.1 in order to validate and verify the information that is going to be processed by the operational side of QAD. The 28.20.1.1 is primarily for the financial side, but this 2.3.1 is for the operational side. So you've got supplier maintenance. There you're going to get the information from your business relationship. You've got supplier data, short name, ship via, remarks, contact information. So the supplier must be created for the operational side of the supplier purchasing. You can enter the Supplier Performance email. I'll talk about that in a little bit. There's currency, language, daybook, whether it's a Kanban supplier. Those are all defined in 23.1. The supplier pricing information, which we'll talk a little bit about later, this relates the specific price table to the supplier that you are dealing with in the 20.3.1 file. So you define your buyer, price table, discount table. You can have fixed price, or you can actually have a price list for non-sales order pricing. This price, non-sales order pricing, relates to system transfers, multi and single, transfers with lot, and unplanned issues and returns from the supplier. There is a frame for enterprise material transfer, and enterprise material transfer is that process of having an order received by customer service over the internet or EDI, and then QAD generates all the required transactions, purchase orders, and sales orders throughout all sites for the supply chain to handle that. I think we're going to have a webinar on enterprise material transfer sometime next year, so be sure to tune in. There's the supplier pricing data, the address data, and the supplier terms, where you define the credit terms, D&B numbers, discount percentages, etc. So those are the fields in 2.3.1 that need to be established for the supplier. In 1.19, you've got supplier cost information. Normally, you and your suppliers don't use the same part numbering schema, so this field or this frame allows you to define the relationship between your number and the supplier number, item number for a particular part. This is used by blanket orders, purchase orders, etc. if it's filled in, and you can develop supplier lead time, quote information, and that's going to default to the POs if that information is input. So we always recommend that you have that information available for the individual supplier and the part number that you're buying from that supplier. Cost sets, I won't talk a lot about cost sets. We covered that in June of this year. Cost sets, more and varied representation of cost relationship to the vendor. So if you got a cost analyst, they should become familiar with the cost maintenance, cost simulations, planning, etc., etc. You can do some wonderful things in evaluating whether your suppliers and you are getting the best bang for the buck. The 1.2.5 is the purchasing account maintenance. Here you can set up by product line, site, and as we mentioned before, that supplier type, the relationships between purchase accounts, POs, overhead, So if you're an accountant, you want to make sure that you're looking at that and getting the most out of the reporting from the general ledger. So let's look at supplier information. There's supplier labels that you can print in 2.3.5. You can print very simple labels for inventory, for shipping. You can make the number of labels, lines per label, the width, etc., etc. That does require a fair amount of setup, but if you go with your IT group, they should be able to help you with that label printing. You want to be able to identify your parts. The item master file for supplier data. We've covered this in a number of webinars. Rules, product line status codes, etc. If you use shipping data, you should have that shipping, freight, weight information so that the system can calculate your cost of freight accurately. There are planning sets of information. We've gone through this extensively. MRP, your make buy codes, your minimums, your maximums, your order quantities, your order policies. You need to make sure that those are accurate for each part number that you're going to be buying from a particular supplier. Item standard cost is built through the standard cost rollup. We went through that in our cost webinar. And you can also define a current cost. This helps the buyers keep track of how much they're costing the organization over a period of time. You can use average or last, or you can ignore it and use none. But that sometimes is very helpful in establishing the standard cost for the next year. In terms of control files, we've looked at 36.9, which contains the EE versions or sections of the control files that used to be in SE. And for supplier purchasing related control files, you've got the accounting, requisition, supplier consignment, and purchasing account. If you look at the inventory account, this is where you tell the system how you want that current cost to be calculated. The sum lower level cost to material cost lets you summarize lower level cost to material. You can tell the system how you want AP rate variances calculated, whether you're going to create transactions in the clearing accounts that is used between sites. The purchasing control in 36.9.5, you can set the default bill to some accrued accounts in terms of finance, day book information, etc. for purchasing control. So let's talk just a little bit about accounts payable. Accounts payable is used to record amounts you owe to vendors and to process payments for those accounts. This is one of the more important aspects of any purchasing organization, is to make sure that your suppliers are paid accurately and timely. You want happy suppliers. So the cycle is basically you place the purchase order, and then you're going to go through this three-way match of the PO to the PO receipt to the supplier invoice. So you're going to do your PO receipt. Your PO receipt is going to be then matched to a supplier invoice that you're going to receive from that supplier. Then you're going to do a payment selection against those. You've got a register that you're going to generate. You can do manual checks. You can do automatic checks. You can cancel checks. And then the payment register is going to actually then reconcile the checks that are written. The names in SE are different than EE, so be careful exactly how you interpret that flow chart, but that's basically how you do it. As far as the accounting flow is concerned, we've got, for example, 1,000 piece or receipt raw material. So we debit the inventory at standard cost and accrue liability at standard cost. Then we receive the vendor invoice, and the vendor invoice, in this case, might charge you $5 more than you had expected. Then you issue the check to the vendor for the 105, and the check clears the bank for the 1,005 process. It's basically the flow of accounting. Any purchasing accounting system needs to be able to deal with non-inventory purchasing, MRO, capital, service, etc. And QAD does this non-inventory purchasings. You've got a supplier activity dashboard that basically shows you exactly what the activity is, your invoices, your summary, your payments, address information, etc. And that is going to give you the information for each one of those suppliers. You've got a 2818.4 supplier balance view. This is the view of all the outstanding supplier balances for whatever selection. Then, as the flow chart indicates, you're going to input the invoice that the supplier has created for or given to you. So you input the supplier invoice. You can do it for an invoice, a credit note, corrections, however you are going to process that. This 2818.2 is that supplier invoice activity. That's going to give you total visibility of all of the debits and credits, standard cost, balance cost, transaction cost, etc. for those invoices. Then the receiving process, your 5.13.1, which we talked about in January, is going to be matched with that invoice in 28.2.1. So you've got a receiving match, so you can track that by status, and then you've got a report of what all of those receipts are and how they match up to your supplier. So the 28.2.5 is that receiving matching report that's going to be used by accounts payable, stockroom, and finance to track that. Then once that matching has taken place, then you're going to select it for payment, and you can do that by status. You can create status codes, initial, paid, etc. Then you're going to create the status or create the payment. This is similar to the SC payment register. Then you're going to execute the payment in 28.9.3.1. And finally, you're going to print that supplier remittance so you understand what has been paid for that supplier. So there's lots of reports available in accounts payable to keep track of that. You need a pretty up to snuff accounts payable clerk, a receiving clerk, and because this can get fairly complex. Evaluated receipt settlement is kind of a way around that whole accounts payable process. Evaluated receipts settlement provides a tool that lets your organization generate invoices automatically based on product receipts. Now it says, note, this process probably won't be used for all suppliers, but when you have a close relationship with the supplier, large volumes, then this may be efficient for both you and the supplier to just generate invoices based on receipt quantity. So the basic flow is the supplier ships the product, okay? The customer receives the product, generates a ERS invoice, customer approves a payment, customer sends a receipt, and then the supplier matches the remittance and the suppliers and the invoice to that process. So the 28.10.24 defines how you're going to do that, whether you're going to use ERS, this is the first button. The ERS option tells you what the default ERS process is, so whether you're going to use ERS or whether that process is disabled. The ERS maintenance for each supplier then is set up by site, by item, or any combination of those. And there you have the ERS option that allows you, if it's a 1, it's not going to generate ERS invoices. You're going to do that manually. If you do it 2, you're going to generate unconfirmed invoices. And if you really have a close relationship with your supplier, then 3 generates a confirmed invoice for those receipts. So the 281013, this is where you process the ERS reports. You run this ERS processor and it'll list all the receivers that need to be processed. You can do it individually, in mass. The purchase order, here's an example. We've got an ERS option number 1. So this says that the confirmed orders are going to be generated automatically. If you use 2, then you're going to basically put a step in the process that allows for a confirmation of that invoice. And then you're going to receive the parts in the normal 513.1. You're going to generate the ERP process by PO. So after your 513.1, you're going to run the 281013. That's going to generate your invoices. That's the invoice view in 28113. You're going to double click on that purchase order. Then you're going to be able to match that posting, and the supplier invoice gives you visibility to all of that activity. So as a summary, evaluated receipt settlement allows you to generate your own invoices based on product receipts. Very nice. Suppliers not only get their money quicker, ERS also reduce the amount of administrative labor. And when there are discrepancies, it can be caught quicker. So issues are not are resolved without a lengthy dispute, as some of us in accounts payable know about. On the customer side, the ERS speeds up your processing and decreases the administrative. And basically, as I said, it allows happy suppliers, which is what you want. So, talking about happy suppliers, QAD gives us a supplier performance functionality where you can monitor the performance of either external or internal suppliers. If you're familiar with Mowgli in the automotive, this is one of the requirements to have a supplier performance. So this functionality allows you to automatically measure material availability. You can do purchased inventory investment. You can look at the productivity of the purchasing department, and you can look at buyer effectivity, cost reductions in essence, measuring the supplier's performance. You've got flexible registration by supplier item, corporate commodity code, date, any combination of those. You've got flexible events and categories that you can define. What do you want to count? When do you want to count them? How do you want to count them? And the supplier performance, if you elect to, can automatically collect data for the performance measurements for 5531 supplier update, purchase order receipts, PO shippers, RTS receipts, even interfaces with services support and DRP. So it's very, very effective. When you consider implementing a supplier performance process, you need to think about what you're going to measure, categories and events, the impact or value of those events, which is more important than others. You're going to have to define it for either all suppliers or a particular population of suppliers. You're going to have to consider the impact or value of events for specific registrations or items. You're going to have to understand the computational system for each calculated, and we'll go through that part calculations. And then which suppliers should receive the email of performance report that we saw in the 2.3.1 process. So the 5.15.24 gives you the control file. If fair metadata that needs to be set up, are you going to use it? What are your days late? What are your over and under percentage shipments that you want to have? What's your quantity over and under percentages? Do you want to include purchase orders, ERP, scheduled orders? Is there a percentage overage or under that you want, as opposed to quantity? Is there a cost over and under? Are you going to have same-day receipts? Are you going to enable inventory transfers? Are you going to do PO returns? Are you going to put in time for ASN calculations? So there's a fair amount of information that you need to understand and come to grips with in order to set up for the service or the supplier performance. There's multiple rating systems. Supplier Performance offers 3 performance calculations. There's a discrete calculation. This counts the number of records. There's a proportional method, which assigns a percentage rated based on your setup. And then there's the parts per method, where you can actually look at the proportional methods for receiving and processing. You're not limited to any one of these in your system. You can apply any method to any registration you're talking, so it's a very flexible process. We looked at the supplier email performance in the 2.3.1, so you have to have that in order to have this work. There's the supplier interval rating, so you set up excellent, great, fair, poor, unacceptable rates, and that can be printed on the supplier performance report card that tells the supplier how they're doing. You can use 5.15.3 supplier category maintenance. These set up optional events for recording the supplier performance. In 5.15.1, you can form performance categories, so you can do that for manual data collections or the automatic. There's how you set your calculation methods for either discrete, part per calculations, or proportional. And then you've got whether you're going to measure discretes, what's your part period factor, counter lookups, and if you want to look up table, you can also define those. In 5.15.5, performance event, this lets you define performance events and assign points to them, either for system events or subjective events. Good phone support, wrong labeling, freight charges, those kinds of things can be measured. And then in 5.15.22, you relate the category to the event. And then in 5.15.7, you define 8 weight factors. So this is basically the alpha factor of supplier performance. We looked at alpha factors in terms of forecasting. So the higher the weight factor, the more important a particular performance category is against their performance. You go through registration for each supplier and how they're going to be measured on POs, distribution orders, RTS receipts, etc. And then the system, as I mentioned, automatically collects data. It's wonderful. You don't have to do it yourself. It just automatically collects it. I don't know how many people I've seen use spreadsheets and browses and exports and dumps to do this. You don't need to. It's all automatically set. So each time a measurable transaction occurs, the system assigns an associated registration and it calculates the data required. You can do user-assisted data collection for the 3.4 menus, for purchase order returns, for performance data maintenance. You can use the missed shipment events generator. So there's user-assisted data collection. There's where you define your data types in 5.13.5. In 5.15.17 is the missed shipment, and you want to run this before you generate the performance report card, so it goes in and looks up all the pertinent activity for a particular month. And then you've got lots of different reports that you can generate for your supplier performance. You've got a supplier performance report in 5.15.14. There's the supplier performance, and then you've got the report card, and this is normally what is sent out to the supplier, and this gives them a very clear indication of how they are doing. Important that both you, the buyer, and your suppliers understand the process, understand the events, the performance calculations, categories, so that there's an agreement on how this supplier performance process is used. Supplier pricing, there is 1.10.1, which is your sales order pricing. We talked last month about the service and support pricing, and you've got also a 1.10.2 supplier pricing menu. So here's where you set up your supplier prices, your price list maintenance. This is going to allow you to define the price list. Is it going to be by product line, by item, by category, whatever. And there are basically 4 different amount types that you can use on the supplier price list side, either an L, list price, P for discount, D, or P for net price discount, D for discount percentage, and M for markup percentage. So the line types, if you look at the P, that's going to give you the ability to set various quantities and different prices for those quantities. The discount is going to give you, again, a amount, and then you're able to apply a percentage discount to that. Same with the markup, depending on the quantity that are ordered. And then list type just allows you to put in the list type and a min-max quantity. This is the supplier report. Remember, this is a favorite report of the suppliers, the buyers, and planners, and accounts payable people at the end of the year. This is what's going to be changed probably every January, so you need to update your supplier price list. You can also have fixed prices in the 5.7 purchase order maintenance. If you check the fixed price list, then when you run 5.19 purchase order cost update, the system is going to not touch this particular purchase order. So that 5.19 allows you to update all of the changes that occurred in the pricing structure and apply them to the outstanding purchase orders. You want to be very careful with that. Security should be assigned to that. You can also generate price lists by item. Supplier price list generation 10.2.6 allows you to create multiple list price using information from the item master file. Again, cautious, that should be well understood, and security should be applied to that. So lastly, we'd like to talk just a little bit about the Supplier Portal. The Supplier Portal, communications in this day of COVID with your vendors, your suppliers, has got to be close-knit. You have to be on the same page as your supplier. The Supplier Portal is basically a communication tool that assists the supplier and customer in the exchange of data and information, both from invoicing, scheduling, accounts payable, etc. So there's the interface is a little bit different than most of your creative process, but you've got customer service, supplier performance, manufacturing efficiency, so you can look at all of those areas. This is the main screen from the Supplier Portal. Here you've got a data tab. You can filter data. You can display it. You can print the information. You can set up alerts for your process. In the search process, you can search either by policy or image. If you've got a policy statement, maybe a cancellation policy, schedule control replenishment that is visible through the supplier portal. Lots of fields that allow you to define multiple order quantities, schedules, replenishment horizons, etc. Then you've got the portal data, which there's more information that is usable by the supplier and you as the buyer to help in that communication process. It's got its own item master file, and there's an interface between QAD and that supplier. So you can set your data elements, you can display, filter the information. There's schedule replenishment that can be done with individual suppliers. This gives them the visibility of what they should be working on. If the supplier is a Kanban supplier, there's a Kanban board functionality, which allows you to tell how the Kanban board, either an external or internal, includes all items that are using replacement. So if you have suppliers that give you lots of part numbers on a Kanban method through the lean functionality in QAD, that is all visible. There's your Kanban board. There's Kanban loop detail that you can define. There's the loop detail. It will generate ASNs from the supplier to you so that you can do an 856 through EDI or an X12, depending on how you receive those. There's your automated shipment notifications, so the buyer can go in and see what is on the way and relate that to what the supplier has shipped. There's status, shipments received, canceled, incomplete, pre-shipment, target deliveries. So lots of good information can be generated out of that ASN. Here's the ASN header and line screen. Again, gives you shipment dates, target deliveries, so you got a better feel for how product is going to come in through the receiving dock. And it also has a messaging system. So instead of fiddling around with emails and notes and whatever, you can put a string of or a thread of activities for a particular supplier or part number rather than playing phone tag or messing with emails. It's right there in the supplier portal. So the supplier portal is a very, very effective tool for that improved communication that is now required in these days of COVID. There's a number of 32 soft data loaders. If you're interested, contact myself or Alex or Nancy or Denise. We'd be glad to give you any information on that. So we've talked about supplier business relationships, some costs, accounts, talked about ERS, accounts receipt settlement, supplier performance, supplier pricing, and supplier performance. So Denise, I'll turn it back over to you, and if there are any questions, thank you for your time and effort.
Again, Don, and that was the last question, but if anybody thinks of anything after the session has ended, certainly reach out directly. We'll include any questions we receive right up until the replay is published. So keep them coming. For now, to be conscientious of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and move along. We do have, oh, I almost forgot. We do get a lot of training questions about training. And yes, we are happy to help with your training needs. Just give us a call or shoot us an email and we can get the training conversation going. A look at upcoming webinars. We have Supply Chain Changes and Challenges on November 18th, which, wow, that will round out our 2020 series, if you can believe that.
Good,
and
2020 should go away.
I know. Right?
Yeah.
And then in January, though, we are right back at it with QAD dates, how data is driven. We hope you will join us for those. And now back to today's webinar, during which Don's topics included several specific to suppliers. There is a medium.com article that was chock full of great nuggets about supplier-related activities and relationships. For instance, it cited an article with these statistics, originally reported by the Tungsten Network. Roughly 6,000 hours a year are wasted due to supplier relationship. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. And they did note that it reflects the average business. It's not accounting for those with bad supplier relationships in particular, just on average time spent. I thought that was kind of remarkable. Another point made is the impact a supplier can have on your brand's image. And they used a very impactful example for this as well. Suppose a tier 2 supplier permits child labor in one of its factories. Well, the media's job is to report the news, but they may present a version that gets the most attention. So yes, the company is less likely to be credited for dissolving the relationship and more likely to be blamed for not precluding the situation in the first place. So this is what leads me to today's quote. The best competitive advantage a company can create is the relationship it forms with its suppliers, because in the end, products can be duplicated, relationships can't. Everybody in attendance today certainly knows this, so it's just a little reminder about the impact suppliers can have both financially and on our brand, not just in times of disruption like we've been experiencing. That is all I have for today, Don. Anything else?
We're just going to relate this to our webinar in November, obviously, since I'm a COVID recoverer, and as we all know, COVID is kind of jacked up the supply chains. The disruptions are just manifest in terms of how we deal with our suppliers. And all of us in the supply chain know that our lifeblood is what we get from our suppliers, then we put it together and sell it. So if we don't have good supplier relationships, we've got real issues. So in November, we'll talk about how to use QAD to kind of adjust for all of the changes that we're seeing in the supply chain. And then January, I'll talk a little bit about how dates are important in QAD. So thank you so much for your attendance. We always enjoy our little chats on a monthly basis. So Denise, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Don. Thanks very much. And thank you, everyone, for your time today. I hope to see you all for our 2020 webinar finale next month. Until then, have a super day and keep well, everybody. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Have a great day.